Aside from 98462 and 87546, we are also introduced to a pair of red engines, who were seen in the Free Railway engines. One was in Edward's Day Out, and another was in the Sad Story of Henry. In this video, I thought I'd simply go into what's known about them using resources such as the Arnold Sodor, its People, Histories, and Railways, the Thomas the Tank Engine Man, as well as lectures that explain more about the lore, including any lore notes or information from lore keepers such as Luke Ryan. I'll then dive into theories and speculations that fans have come up with, as well as adding some of my own into the mix. Throughout this video, I will officially not be referring to them by any fan names of any kind given to them by fans. I'm officially just going to individually refer to them as the first and second red engines. Now I've gotten that out of the way, let's get into the video. In the Railway series, the only known appearance was in the Free Railway engines. The first red engine, who appeared in the story Edward's Day Out, which takes place in 1923, was shown to be one of the 5 engines in Edward's shed to have poked fun out of him for being old and not being in use, while the second one in the Sad Story of Henry, which takes place in 1922, was depicted as the engine who attempted to push Henry out of the tunnel but to no avail. Behind the writing, when Dalby was re-illustrating the works of William Middleton and Reginald Payne in both the Free Railway engines and Thomas the Tank Engine, with how the engine looks in the illustration, he intended for this specific red engine that tried to push Henry out of the tunnel to be James, which explains why the engine looks just like him. Front pony truck, extended front, features that James is shown and described to have. However, Awdry reported that James wasn't present during the time of the Free Railway engines, and was only present by the last story of the book Thomas the Tank Engine, known as Thomas and the Breakdown Train, which takes place in 1925. And that's about it really. Compared to 87546 and 98462, who were explained in a letter, there's really not much known about them. No mention of why they were on Sodor, or how they were to the other engines. All we know is that the second red engine was present around by 1922, while the first one was present by 1923. Now, I've seen some debate on whether these two red engines are really separate characters, or are one entity that was inconsistently drawn. Some comments, even the ones under polls, videos, and community posts I've made, have said that the engine in the Sad Story of Henry that looks just like James is the same engine we see in Edward's Day Out, just illustrated inconsistently, since Dalby is prone to make mistakes and inaccuracies, and the fact that by the visuals, he intended for this engine to likely be James. While some argue that these two could have been their own entities, with some referring to the way the two were drawn in the illustrations, which is a weak point in my eyes, since Awdry didn't clarify that these two illustrations made by Dalby were indeed the same engine, like he did when addressing why Henry looked like Gordon when he was painted blue, and he has stated many times that the illustrations were not to be taken seriously. The strongest point I've seen is when some comments refer to pages of the iOS book, where it says that the NWO have borrowed engines from both the Furness and Midland Railways, who came to help with the NWR's construction during 1915 to 1916, with some of them even staying on by 1923. What do I think? Well, I honestly think these two could have been their own entities. Given the iOS book implied a couple of engines from both the Furness and Midland were loaned, could mean that they were their own characters with their own basis. In the story Henry Sneeze, we see what appears to be an engine that resembles the exact same red engine who tried to push Henry out of the tunnel in the Sad Story of Henry. But is it really the same engine, or is it just James but illustrated wrong? Dalby. Well, here's what I think. I personally don't think this engine here is the same engine we'd see trying to push Henry out of the tunnel in the Sad Story of Henry. In fact, unlike that engine, I genuinely think this engine here was supposed to be James, but illustrated wrong. Now you might wonder, Scorch, what made you come to that conclusion? Well, let me relay it for you. 1. The red engine was likely returned by either 1923 or 1925. In the iOS book, it says that by 1923, some Furness and Midland stock had to be returned, and by the time James was purchased in 1925, it was likely that this red engine was no longer needed, and thus was sent back. Second, Dalby had a tendency to make mistakes when illustrating for the books. He's the one who illustrated Henry to look too close to Gordon when he was painted blue. He's the one who kept switching Henry's wheel arrangement between a 462 and a 460 when he was in his old shape, and he is the one who misdrew James as a 460 in this illustration rather than a 260, which is what he actually is. Third, James has been on the NWR since 1925 and was still present around 1935 and still is present to this day. So with these factors in mind, this made me come to the conclusion that this engine is James. Just illustrated wrong due to Darby likely getting him and this red engine confused. Now you could argue that this engine is the same one we see in the sad story of Henry, that it was loaned back to the Northwestern Railway while Henry was away at crew, which explains both the livery and the red wheels. However, even so, there's no real guarantee that the same engine from the sad story of Henry returned to help out when Henry's at crew. The chance of it being the case is roughly 50-50, meaning that while the chance is there is, however, no real guarantee that the engine we see in the sad story of Henry is the same one that we see in Henry's Sneeze, or that it was loaned back to the Northwestern Railway to help out. Here, I'll be going over theories that fans have shared all over the internet, as well as some that has been shared in the community post I made, asking people to share their speculations and theories regarding the two red engines. So let's get into it. Some theorize that both the first and second red engines have originated from the LMYR. Two theorize that the first red engine is an LMYR Class 8. Specifically the early and original built design. One theorized that due to being a poor performer, he would take more trucks and coaches than he can really handle, while the other commented that it would be an interesting idea to have an LMYR engine who was painted red before James came, as there could be story potential between the two. A couple have theorized that the second red engine is the same type of engine that James is, an LMYR Class 28. With the front pony truck modification, who arrived onto the NWR way before James arrived. So looking at these, I think the first red engine being an LMYR used Class 8, specifically the 1908 version, could potentially work as its basis, since this variant of the class were both poor steamers and performers who failed to exceed expectations. Based on Henry's description in the iOS book, it specifically mentioned had wanted an Atlantic, which were predominantly used for express passenger work, so the NWO would have likely been looking for an express passenger engine to haul their express trains, which could be what a 1908 variant of Hughes Class 8 could have been on loan for. The LMYR was absorbed into the LNWR on January 1st, 1922, and the LNW were next door neighbors to the Midland and Furness Railways, and just like them, would have been closer to Sodor in terms of proximity, which means the NWO could easily reach out to them to borrow an engine, which makes the 1908 version of the Class 8 more possible to be loaned to them, with 15 of the 1908 Class 8s being rebuilt into the 1919 variant, as well as 55 more being mass-produced between 1921 to 1925. There wouldn't be any issue loaning one of the 5 remaining 1908 Class 8s, nor would there be any concern of having it returned. I also want to say that I like this user's idea of how the first red engine is characterized, being a poor performer, leading him to prove that he's not a flawed engine, which led to him taking too many trucks and coaches for him to handle. It also reminded me of the episode Philip to the Rescue, where James ended up taking so much rolling stock he ended up nearly crashing when coming down Gordon's Hill, but was saved by Philip. As for the second red engine being an LMYR Class 28, whether it's the 060 version or the modified 260, it just really doesn't work. If this engine was on Sodor before James and is the same class as him, if not the same design, this would mean that James wouldn't be able to go to Sodor, since there's already an engine like him over there. You could say that the engine as a 28 could have just returned back to the newly formed LMS in 1923, though I don't think the LMS would have wanted it back. Going off James's lore, the experiment was proven to be a failure, and even so, some engines from the Furness and Midland were implied to have stayed even by 1923, even if said red engine was an actual 27 or 28. The first and second red engines are also theorized to be locomotives that originated from the LBSCR, the first one being theorized to be either a K or B4 class, and the second red engine theorized to be a C2 class, which I don't think they would have been loaned, since the K class alongside the E2 and L classes helped lift the weight of the LBSCR's workload, and I think the B4s and C2s were still needed on the LBSCR, not to mention South is kind of a bit far from where Sodor is, so I don't think the Northwestern Railway would have loaned engines from a company that's so far away. It would have made more sense if they loaned engines from nearby companies such as the Furness, Midland, and by extension the LNWR, the Northeastern and the Caledonian Railway. Yes, Thomas is on Sodor and he's an LBSCR E2, however he came to Sodor due to being lost in war, which I might cover more in another video if anyone's interested, as I might have an answer to how he was able to get to Sodor. Others have theorized that the first red engine could have been a locomotive that originated from LNER pre-grouping railways, such as the Great Central, Northeastern, and Great Northern Railways, listing candidates like the Great Central 8F class, or later LNER B4, a popular choice for the red engine, GNR number 13, and the Raven A2, another popular choice for the first red engine. I think GNR number 1300 and the Raven A2 could work for the first red engine, since number 1300 was a non-standard Atlantic, which led to the Atlantic being withdrawn a year after 1923, as well as with the Raven A2 after losing in a trial to Gresley's A1, of which Pacific for Gresley to standardize on. They could have been loaned in 1923, as the LNER was close to Sodor as well. And the fact that the NWR were able to get Gordon, a GNR A1 prototype, sold to them, means the NWR could easily reach out to the LNER to get some engines on loan. As for the Great Central Railway 8F, I was a bit hesitant to say yes to the idea of it being loaned, but when I considered that under the LNER, Gresley designs like the A1s, the K3s, and the O2s would have been mass produced, as well as a number of Great Central Railway goods engines on the Great Central Main Line, it's where I personally begin to think that the LNER wouldn't have an issue loaning one off, let alone have to worry about classes they aren't mass producing returning. The rest theorized they are from railways like the Furness, Midland, and London Northwestern Railways, as all three were next door and were close to Sodor, with the first red engine theorized to be either a LNW or Clawton Rail Experiment or a Midland Railway Class 3, while the second red engine was theorized to either be a Furness Railway D5 or a Midland Railway 483 class. It's also theorized that both first and second red engines originated from the Glasgow and Southwestern Railway. The first red engine theorized to be a 128 class 460 locomotive, and the second theorized to be a 403 class. One theorized that the second red engine was the original banker at Wellsworth before Edward, while another says that he was a very helpful engine when he was loaned to the Northwestern Railway, which both seem possible given that he's a blank slate just like the first red engine. Before I go into what their potential basis could be, I want to go over a few set of rules as I go on. 1. I will not take the illustrations seriously. Now yes, Awdry did go as far as to explain some of them, such as why Henry looked too much like Gordon when he was painted blue and was in his old shape, or why Gordon's 20 board and cylinders looked so different from the actual A1s or A10s. However, the illustrations aren't really accurate to Awdry's lore. A good example of this is the sad story of Henry. In the illustrations, Ballyhoo, later Henry's tunnel, is depicted with 2 bores throughout the story, when actually, during the sad story of Henry, Ballyhoo tunnel only had 1 bore engines had to go in and out of when traveling on the main line, and only gained 2 by the time Henry was bricked up. Something to keep in mind is that the illustrations that the 2 red engines are in were illustrated by Dolby, who is infamous for making errors in the illustrations, and even said that the RWS would eventually die out, showing how little he cared about the Railway series, and gives me no logical reason to use illustrations to discover what bases these 2 are. Second, I will only pick candidates that existed at least between 1900 to 1922, so any bases designed after 1923 will not be chosen as potential candidates. Third, the railways I would choose candidates from are going to be both the Furness and Midland Railways, as both were next door to Northwestern Railway and had some engines loaned to them even after their formation, the Northeastern, Caledonian, Glasgow and Southwestern, and London Northwestern Railways, since all 4 were close in proximity to Sodor. The Railway Operations Division, since they have loaned engines to other railways before, so the Northwestern Railway might not be that different. The Great Western Railway, since Hat was once an apprentice at Swindon, he could get a locomotive loaned from them, like how William Stanier, who was once an apprentice at Swindon, was able to loan drawings of the GWR's King class when designing his Princess Royal Pacifics. And finally, the Great Central and Great Northern Railways, as by 1923 when the LNER is formed, there could have been some engines that the LNER could have loaned due to being non-standard, flawed, or that they were just able to be spared off without the LNER worrying about their necessity. And lastly, these are just my opinions. If you disagree, then that's perfectly fine. Not my problem. Okay, now I've set the rules, let's go over the candidates for these two, starting with the first red engine. From the Northeastern, we got the NER class S, S1, and S2. All three were port steamers due to the size of the firebox grates and the crew's inexperience with the S2s. All three could have been loaned due to being port steamers. We got the Caledonian Railway 956s and 191s, both were port steamers and performers. The 191s due to being short on steam unless skillfully fired, reminds me of a certain engine, and the 956s grouting and valve gear. There's also the Caledonian Railway 60 class, which despite being robust and free steaming, were very sluggish and dull in performance, led to them being deployed more on goods than passengers. Definitely engines that the Caledonian would loan out to the Northwestern Railway. We got average but mediocre performers like the Raven A2 and the LNWR Clawton classes. The A2, while an average steamer at best, had issues with its length being way too long, as well as issues with its route availability. Since the class lost in a trial to the Gresley A1s, on which Pacific for Gresley to standardize on, the LNER wouldn't have any issues loaning it in 1923 to the NWR. As I said with 98462 and 87546, the first red engine could have a dynamic with Gordon as an A2, being antagonistic towards Gordon, all because his brothers lost in a trial to the A1s, Gordon's brothers, on which Pacific for Gresley to standardize on, and thus he ended up being salty about it. The cylinder design of the Clawtons was described to be not very optimal, which led to performance becoming mediocre and could be the catalyst for them being loaned to the Northwestern Railway. The flaw of the cylinder design not being optimal could characterize the red engine. Perhaps he feels though he needs to prove himself to prove he's not a mediocre performer, which led to him doing more than he can actually do. Or perhaps he puts down other engines because of it. The LMYR 1908 Hughes Class 8, which was owned by the LNWR by January of 1922. Since it was a poor steamer and performer, it could have been loaned by the fact that the NWR were looking for a passenger engine. Since it was owned by the LNWR, it'd be easy to loan to the Northwestern Railway. There's the Great Central Railway Robinson Class 1 and 8C. While both were elegant in design, they suffered from having shallow fireboxes and the Class 1 with its steam passages, affecting steam production. And because of those factors, it's possible that the LNER would have loaned them out since they're pretty much dead weight. There's also a draft of a Robinson 462 Pacific, which was said to have been designed back in 1911, and I think someone said it has a similar issue with the firebox being very shallow, which would have made it inadequate. Perhaps it could have been built in 1921 for the upcoming LNER, similar to what Rexeljet did for his 98462. As one of these, the first red engine could have a rivalry with Gordon, like if he was an A2, giving him the hardest time out of all the engines. Perhaps it could be that when Gresley took on the role as the LNER's CME, the first red engine, as a Robinson locomotive, believed that Gresley took away Robinson's future, since the LNER intended Robinson to be their CME, which resulted in him going at Gordon since he's a Gresley design. However, he failed to realize that Robinson was close to retirement and was the one that nominated Gresley for it. The Robinson 8F class, which could have been loaned to help the goods work, since there were other Great Central locomotives that would have still been on the GCR and the LNER, it probably wouldn't be a big deal for having one 8F being loaned off. The RD 280s could have been loaned to the NWR, perhaps to help out with their goods services after World War I, and it's possible since they were also loaned to 9 railways across Britain, like the Great Western and the London and Northwestern Railways. So the NWR might not be an exception to this. We got Great Western locomotives like the Star and Sane classes, which could have gone them loaned, maybe somewhere in 1923, since he made some connections with them, like his friendship with William Stanier, who at the time was the works manager. Also would be interesting to see an engine nicknamed a Saint act the exact opposite of what a Saint is meant to be, or how it's a star class, yet its behavior doesn't exactly shine like one. we got large tank engines like the Vanci Resolve 115 class and the LT and SR 2100 class. I guess the 115's Baltics could have been easily loaned, as it originates from the furnace, which is next door to Sodor and could easily get to Sodor. Same with the LT and SR 2100 class, since this railway, the London, Tipperary and Sudrian Railway, was purchased and owned by the Midland Railway in 1912, making it more possible to be loaned to the Northwestern Railway. Since compared to the 115 class, it also has quite a crappy tractor effort, which could be more reason to loan it off. There's also this draft of a 264 drawn up by Jock Henderson, which was drafted in February of 1914 after the LT and SR's pending electrification and ban on Baltics, which maybe it could also have been loaned, or could be the cause for why one of the 2100s were loaned off to the Northwestern Railway. From the Glasgow and Southwestern is a draft of a 460, which I think is meant to be a rebuild of their Baltics, dubbed the 381 class, proposed by Whitelake, which could work for the red engine. Finally, from the Great Northern, we got the Awdry prototype, number 461, a non-standard consolidation built in 1918. And since it's kinda on the same page as Gordon's status, being a unique physical prototype that was different from the standard design, it could have been loaned. Geo number 13, an experimental Atlantic, another non-standard design, which was a poor steamer in service and who the LNER could have loaned off. Then there's the Great Northern Railway H2s and H3s, or later known as LNER K1 and K2 moguls. Since the LNER would have been focused on the mass production of Gresley's H4, or LNER K3s, the LNER could have loaned it off to help with the NWR's mixed traffic workload, and I highly doubt there would be any worry of having it returned back. Okay, now I went over the candidates for the first red engine, it's time to do the second one. From the Midland Railway, we got 440s like the Class 3 and 483 class, goods engines like the Fowler 3835 class, and Johnson 2F, which would have been likely since these engines would have likely been loaned to help with the Northwestern Railway's construction. There's the Vanci Railway's 060s, such as the D1, D3, D4, and D5 classes, as well as the Vanci Railway K1 or 120 class, which also could have been loaned to help with the Northwestern Railway's construction. There's LNWR goods engines such as the 17-inch coal and 18-inch goods classes, 440s like the Renown and Persecutor classes, the Glasgow and Southwestern Railway Drummond 279 class. While they steamed really well, they were terribly slow when going uphill on the GSWR and were prone to overheat their bearings, which could be plausible for why they were loaned to the Northwestern Railway. So what do I think their bases are? Well, I like to think that the first red engine is a LT and SCR 2100 class, specifically Midland Railway number 1205. Built in 1912, was loaned to the NWR in 1922, and was sent away somewhere in 1926 to the LMS. As for the second red engine, I like to think that he's a Vanci Railway D3 class, built in 1899, loaned to help with the Northwestern Railway's construction, and stayed until 1923 when he was sent back to the LMS. While these two red engines signify the same level of insignificance as 98462 and 87546, in the grand scheme of Awdry's lore, what makes them more interesting is how so anomalous they are, compared to the two blue engines who got a whole letter to themselves and were given numbers. But these two red engines, they have no names, no story behind them, not even a letter about who they were, adding to that mysterious and obscure part of who they are, which I actually like. Many might want to know who they really are from Awdry's words, but to be honest, I'm kinda glad there is no real answer to them. We wouldn't have as many discussions and theories about them as we have today. It's a lack of answers to everything about the RWS that creates this room for interpretation. These two are just a living embodiment of whatever they are or what happened to them. It's up to our imaginations, and I quite like it.